Hey there and welcome to another episode of Seenu. This episode, I guess the last couple episodes have not been on schedule, and by schedule I mean on Saturdays, which is the day I usually release these videos. And I don't see that getting any better in the next couple of weeks, if not months, because, I have so much on my plate right now that I really can't, I'm unable to post videos that often. But I still promise, Seenu to be out every 2 weeks at the most. Hopefully we can keep that promise, and if not, we'll figure something out. But in the meantime, I do apologize, by the way, for the flickering roofs at the beginning. I think that bug is it's showing up again. I fixed that several episodes ago, but maybe something new with the update. In case you don't know, there's a new DLC that came out. It's a concerts thing. I'm not gonna get it. I think it's just a waste of money. I usually, buy these things just mostly to support the developers, but it's a little bit expensive, and honestly, it's completely useless to me. So that's all I'm gonna say about that. In any case, we started things off by tweaking the airport a little bit, or the runway, for that matter. Because many of these signs that I put down were incorrect. So I had a chat. I've been talking to a lot of people, or consulting with a lot of people, and one of them being Vesmer22, who I mentioned in the previous episode. He's the one who made many of these airport assets that you saw a second ago, and he's been sending me a ton of feedback on how to get the signage right on my runway. So thank you so much for that. And the thing is, at this airport, in this episode, I was planning not to work on the airport very much for a very specific reason that didn't actually came true. So I know many of you were expecting me to, I'm sure many of you were expecting me to go work on the terminals and start, adding more details to the airport on this episode. Unfortunately, that is not the case. See, what happened is I wanted to do another guest episode with B. Squigglehausen. I guess I can ruin the surprise now because that is not happening. We got into this big fight. No, I'm kidding. He's super busy, and he will definitely do another guest episode just like Flux did in the future, but now he's moving back, I think, to the East Coast, so there's a lot of things changing in his life, and he really couldn't get an episode of Seenu out. So he was going to work on the main terminal, like I said, adding details, adding planes and things like that. But I think that task will be left for me. And, when I started recording this episode, we were still on schedule. However, by the time I was almost done recording, he told me he couldn't make it. So I guess that is something that I will have to do for the next episode. So, you can look forward to that. I definitely don't want to postpone the airport anymore. I really want to tackle. I'm pretty excited about it too. And in this episode, however, as you probably can tell from the thumbnails and the titles, we are going to be working on. We're actually going to be completing and making a ton of progress. That's another reason why I sort of delayed releasing this episode. We're going to be completing a huge chunk of this island, basically the whole south of the airport. Of the airport island is going to be pretty much done. We're going to be doing a few farms, and I guess the highlight of the episode will be the retreat, or this hotel / touristy area that is going to feature. Well, you know what? I'm getting ahead of myself. There's going to be plenty of time for that. In the meantime, let me tell you what I'm doing here. So this whole section of the island, all these roads that you see on the screen, have to go through the airport. In fact, I think these roads are somewhat closed off. Maybe only local traffic is allowed to use them, and not just anyone who wants to get there. So probably it's blocked off to residents, or specific very special traffic, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So what I noticed is that there's only one dock that connects this side of the island to the outside world. And this is going to be a 100% visual dock. It's not going to be a functional one. there's no ship paths on this side of the island, and even though I could just, use mass transit or any of those mods to connect it, but I figured, just nicer, just to keep it non-functional. I think it serves the purpose of aesthetics for the most part, and that's enough for me. So I'm applying a bit of the same treatment here, as you can see, with the breakwater rocks, but it's an otherwise pretty simple build. Now, switching gears again, going back to the runway, because this took me a while to get it done. It wasn't that easy. In fact, I ended up changing it off camera after these changes. You see how I'm using like double signs there, like two sets of two signs? I ended up removing one set on each side, so they look a little bit more realistic. This airport doesn't have that many runway signs anyways. But you're going to see how they look at the end during the cinematics. I'm a little bit all over the place today. I don't know why. I'm actually pretty excited about how this episode turned out and the amount of progress that has been made. I'm also recording this in the middle of the solar eclipse in case you are interested in that at all. I can't see it really from my home, and also don't have the proper eyewear to be able to see it. I think there's going to be like 60% of an eclipse. I think it already happened by now since I started recording, but I really wanted to get this video out. For the most part, that's what I'm focused my whole morning on doing. But so most of these areas, going back to the game, of course, most of these areas around this dock and just the whole southern part of this island is going to be farms, like I said before. And we're going to be using very similar techniques as the ones we used in the farms we did several episodes ago. So, just for the most part, putting down the big decals and just having rows of different crops. In this case, for example, I think I'm going to use the lily bush, I think, from Pidelmo. I can't remember. Or I'm using privates, or the privets. I don't know how to say this tree, but you know what I mean. These tiny trees, they look great for crops. And I'm just, trying to line them up as straight as I can using the decals underneath as somewhat of a ruler, which it's actually pretty handy. However, I did wanted to, add some road access and some houses too, because, well, you want caretakers for some of these farms. You just don't want them to grow on their own without being taken care of by anyone. So what I'm doing here is making a fake entrance. There's no road connection, even though later on I will end up adding one, simply because the house that I'm going to be plopping in just a second doesn't have a road connection, which means it wouldn't really work, and it will start getting, it will start complaining there's no road access. And I know there's a ton of mods that I can use to get rid of that, but I still try to not override things as much as I can. Recently, the latest mod I added, just so you know, is the no fires mod, because fires, I had to re-enable natural disasters. I had that mod off for 2 months now. And the thing is, there's some cool assets from natural disasters, some like antennas. In fact, the antenna I put down at the beginning of the episode comes from that mod. So that's a vanilla asset, just so you know. In any case, I had to turn it on again, and then things started catching on fire, so I had to resource to the no fires mod. So now nothing will catch on fire, which is unfortunate. I do like to see, buildings being on fire in the back, but I don't want buildings to go abandoned. That's my main thing. So I just decided to get rid of it completely and sacrifice a little bit of the, simulation, so that I could get less work done. Every building that goes abandoned, I have to go replop it, which is a painstakingly long process. Now, a cool technique that I'm trying on here that I recommend you try it too, if you want to get crops to be like properly aligned and such, is to use those pedestrian roads as rollers, basically as guides. And they come out great. They do have, the proper spacing. For the most part, I'm eyeballing the actual, the exact position at the end. But I did want to, have equidistant set of crops, and using a pedestrian path was the easiest way. And as you can see here, I'm using also pedestrian paths to even align the, just all these clusters of trees. I wanted to have segments of heavily forested areas in between the farms. So it's not going to be just crazy amounts of farmland one next to the other. There's going to be separation from, using all these trees, specifically around the area of the ocean. I'm guessing, having such a strong, okay, let me rephrase that. Having a lot of winds coming from the ocean side, I think, are a little bit harmful to the crops. So what I noticed on the screen is that farms are a little bit inland, and they're, surrounded by heavily forested areas. So I'm guessing it's to protect them from the strong winds. So that's why I'm going to be doing for the rest of the episode as well. I'm just going to be foresting the whole area around the shoreline or the beach or whatever you want to call it. In fact, I've been using a lot those decals that you see there with the foam decals from Ronix. I think they look great. I used them before, and I only put them in specific places, but I realized that they look much better if you just cover the whole shoreline with them, and it really makes your ocean front look way more realistic. So I highly recommend you try it out. You really can't overdo it with that mod. And over here, by the way, same thing, trying a different crop, and obviously trying to space things out a little bit more efficiently. Sometimes if you use only the pedestrian path, the gap in between the crops is a little bit too thick. So in this case, I decided to move things around a little bit so that they're not so spaced out between them. Another technique that I use a lot, and I've been asked this question before, is so in this case when I'm using these large decals, which obviously despawn every time you zoom out, and people end up with or you just end up with a gap. So like the grass will be the color that you see when you zoom out instead of this bright yellow texture. And a technique that I'm using to sort of fix that when I'm getting aerial shots is to basically use surface painter to cover the ground underneath the decal that I'm placing. I'm trying to find a color that matches. So in this case, I'm using the ruin texture that is pretty similar, and at least in the sense of shade of color, to the tiled soil that you see there, that tile decal. And what happens is when you zoom out, you still see the bright yellow texture, even though the decal's disappeared. And that's pretty much how I do it. In some other cases, if I'm using, for example, a little bit of dirt, I go for the gravel. Like in this case, for example, I'm using the gravel texture because I'm expecting this area to be a little bit darker than the areas surrounding it. So still, when you zoom out, even though you can add decals to this to make it look a bit more realistic when zoomed in, it still looks dark. So this is right here the perfect example. These dark mud decals will totally disappear when I zoom out, but since I have a dark texture in the background, they will look pretty amazing, actually. And another thing that I'm trying here, and I did this before, I'm using this hedge, or creating a hedge instead of using fences all over. In certain areas, I try to use a hedge made out of bushes and grass clusters and things like that. And I think they look great. I leave random gaps every once in a while, so these could be entrances for farm equipment maybe, or just simply workers coming in and out and just segmenting or fencing off certain areas. This is a cool thing I'm trying, by the way. I did like a bit of a cut time lapse here, so you can see the progress being made one section at a time. I thought it was an interesting thing I could try instead of repeating myself doing farms over and over again. I just decided to cut things off. And now here's the coolest build from this episode. We're starting this retreat, this hotel that actually it does exist in real life. It doesn't look quite as I'm designing it, because, well, I couldn't find any reference photos or of any kind. So I just figured, hey, let's just do my own thing. Try to create a good looking, hotel that it's loosely based in the real one, but it's pretty much made up. So one thing that this hotel had is a whole bunch of roundabouts. None of these roads are actually paved. As you can see, everything around it's dirt roads. However, it looks like this area, since this hotel is actually pretty big, it does look like these roads are indeed paved. So, the guests themselves can use golf carts to move around using these paved roads. But if they venture any farther out, they will have to use dirt roads. In fact, later on, you'll see how I'm gonna pave just a little segment of the outside roads that leads to the beach side that guests can use to go to the beach. I guess that's pretty self-explanatory. And I tried, a whole bunch of different designs. I knew that I wanted this Y-shaped layout of the buildings, but this, perfectly symmetrical shape in the middle wasn't, it didn't look right. I tried a whole bunch of different things. What you see me do there, by the way, I remember saying this many, many times before, but it's, I'm trying to create notes so that I don't get the bollards. If you get if you get two notes very close to each other, the bollards and all these like random props that get generated, well, they disappear. So that's kind of what I was doing before. But this is me finally, settling on an option. I wanted things to be pretty symmetrical for the most part. So this Y-shaped building, it's perfectly aligned to the 90-degree the 90-degree intersection in the back. And I wanted this whole area to sort of flow using that direction. So, the first thing that I wanted to try is having a bit of a network of pedestrian paths that sort of surround this building. And then, this area is going to be a little bit fenced out. It's going to have a pool. Obviously, I'm going to be changing this design multiple times throughout this time lapse until I came up with a version that I like, which you'll probably see in just a couple of minutes, because it didn't take me long to get it the way I wanted to. One thing I'm trying though, and I'm going to be using this quite a bit, are these cement sidewalks by King Leno. This is pretty funny. So I saw them. He tweeted a screenshot of one of his projects. He actually has a YouTube channel if you want to check it out. I'm going to try to include the link in the description. And I saw that in one of his, teasers on Twitter, and I was like, hey, what are those sidewalk things? And he was telling me, no, I wasn't planning on releasing them, but if you want them. So I said yes, and now they're available in the workshop, and they look amazing, and there's so many things you can do with them. It's a set. It's basically like the concrete curbs that we had a while back, but these are just way thinner in terms of height. And you can just literally use them for separating parking lots or things like that. I mean, you can imagine already the things you can do with such an asset, and they're so simple too, but they look amazing. They're a great contrast, at least with my concrete or against my concrete texture. But yeah. Thank you for releasing them, I guess, King, if you're watching this. And what I'm doing here, by the way, is having a bit of entrance with a boulevard in the middle. There's obviously this one-way road on each side. Again, I obviously did it wrong at first. So I had to go back and redo it. I'm still used to, the driving on the right aspect. I guess that's what I have to deal with every day. However, if you remember correctly, Seenu is a drive on the left, so that's why traffic is reversed, in case you didn't notice that. It's funny because I posted my time-lapse series from when I was driving around in the UK, and I still get people sending me comments like, why is all the traffic reversed? Did you flip the video? Not understanding that other countries drive, in different directions. Isn't that crazy? But yeah, there's a lot of countries that drive on the left, and obviously a lot more that drive on the right. That's one of the cool, interesting things about, I guess, countries. I don't know why I'm talking about this. In any case, those are the two paved road segments that I was telling you about. And this, what I'm doing here, it's definitely a little bit interesting. I ended up not selling with this design, but it was cool indeed. If the textures weren't so bright, by the way, what I'm doing is I sunk these set of wood planks and use them as a deck, basically. And the texture looks pretty good. However, it's so bright because it's being hit by the sun. And if it was a little bit darker, I would have totally kept it this way and have, just kind of fake pedestrian road. Well, not a road, but like a pedestrian path underneath them so that people can actually use it. I ended up changing this to an actual pedestrian wooden path, which exists in the game. I think it's part of network extensions. But I don't know, just this design, I decided to include this in the time lapse simply because I thought it was a cool idea. And, in the future, you can basically grab any asset that you think looks cool, sunk it into the ground, and use it as a floor texture instead of using decals. So, just food for thought. You can be pretty creative with very limited tools, actually. And over here, just adding a few more details to the, perimeter fence. I wanted to have a hedge, but I also wanted to have a bit of a larger fence that makes this whole area a little bit more private. And, this retreats wouldn't be complete without some sort of sport complexes. And since, this area is not super big, I figured that having a couple tennis courts, would look nice and fit the theme quite reasonably, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So, just connecting everything with a pedestrian path and obviously adding details in terms of vegetation, as you can see here, is a big part of that. I wanted the entrance to be like pretty grandiose, oh, we're entering this magical place kind of thing. So, you're gonna see me add a ton of trees and flowers and bushes in just a second. But one of these paths too, I wanted to do a bit of a shaded walk. In this case, I'm using a whole bunch of pergolas, and I'm also including some vines kind of growing in between the different, these different segments. These vines, I don't know, they're necessarily meant to be used in the way I'm using it. They look like they're facing different angles, but they're actually flat, if I'm not mistaken. But once I'm done adding the rest of the detail, they will look a little bit more natural. Right now they don't, but trust me, they will. Over there, just adding a few more lights on the areas around this hotel. And of course, it couldn't be, it couldn't be a proper structure build without having some concrete expansion joints to make all these sidewalks. I didn't want to have tiles everywhere. And to be honest, I need to subscribe to a few more tiles in the workshop because I only have a limited amount that I keep reusing over and over again. And they do look nice and all, but I think I need some new assets there. So probably need to go hunting on a single workshop for a little bit. But honestly, just adding these concrete expansion joints and just adding a few manholes every once in a while, or those drains, it really, sets up the tone. It really adds a ton of detail on an otherwise super dull concrete slab. And this is part of what I was telling you before, just adding several segments of flowers and bushes and trying to keep the colors pretty similar. I didn't want to have like a crazy rainbow of elements. And I was trying to keep all these vegetations contained within the boundaries of this big metal planter thing. Obviously, you can see how there's a bit of a pedestrian crossing there, and I try to leave that gap going into the tennis courts and down to the pergolas. And I was trying to figure out what asset I could use to have a bit of a continuous pedestrian path. I couldn't find any, if I'm not mistaken. However, I did add some of these speed bumps and obviously some pedestrian signs together with a stop decal that I think I want to add in just a few moments. So that there's a little bit more realism. Obviously, this is not necessarily designed for people with disabilities, for with wheelchairs and things, because there's still a curve. But it definitely, I mean, I guess you can use the main ramp there. I bet there's going to be very little traffic here, especially because the traffic is pretty much completely blocked off by the airport in this area. Your only choices, getting into here are probably boat, and that's it. I guess helicopter, but that's a little bit too much, I think. I'm sure the way this works is every once in a while, or once a day or something like that, they open up the gates and you can travel through the edges of the airport, no problem. If you want to pick up tourists from the airport itself and bring them to here, I'm sure that can be arranged. That's at least what in my mind I thought was the case. But in changing subjects a little bit, instead of talking about logistics, I'm focusing my efforts here on the vegetation around this hotel. And I wanted to have, a whole bunch of trees around it, but I did want to have areas of just plain grass. I didn't want to cover everything with trees because I do want this building to be somewhat visible as we'll look at it from above. And as you can see here, this is the path that I end up settling for, which is part of the network extensions, if I'm not mistaken. And it looks great. It's a little bit thicker than the one I was using, but at least it's a functional one, and the texture is just perfect. So I decided to settle for this one instead, and still keep the planks as flooring for the actual roofed area that has I don't know if you noticed, but it has a couple of toilets in the back. It has some beach showers. Obviously it has a roof, like that metal shed kind of roof thing. And in just a moment you're gonna see me add, there you go. So I'm gonna be adding some chairs and some umbrellas and just making this look like a real beach site. But unfortunately, that's the last thing I want to be able to do in this episode. In the next one, I promise you, we're going to go back to the airport and start working on the terminals and adding details here and there. This is the final result, by the way, of those signs. I don't think I'm going to change them anymore. But in case you enjoy this episode, please go click the like button. That's very much appreciated. And if you're new to the channel, I want to encourage you to go click subscribe. That way you're notified immediately after one of my videos comes out. Remember to also visit my merch store, strictoaster.com/store, if you want to support the channel. But that's all for now. I want to thank you all for watching and hope to see you in the next one.